out. Breathe in and breathe out. BBC4 finds inner peace with Retreat, meditations from a monastery, starting Tuesday at 9.
Now on BBC Two, in the Sign Zone, what to dig up and what to plant as the year draws to a close. Gardener's World.
There she comes. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is a standard bay and part of the herb garden that we've been making over the last year. And when I planted them, and I planted 4 on each corner where the paths cross, I thought they looked really good. But gradually, as the weeks have gone by, they're not really doing enough. They haven't got enough heft for this key point in the garden. So I'm going to move them and replace them with yews. And they'll just be a little bit bigger. And it's a good time to move any evergreen trees or shrubs, because the soil is still warm. And although it's a traumatic experience for any plant, they will recover, the roots will grow back, and they should be absolutely fine. Oh, that's almost perfect. How about that? I'm going to add a little bit of compost underneath it. And it is important when you move anything to firm it in really well, because of course it hasn't got any roots to anchor it. And finally, give it a good soak. Now, coming up on today's programme, we meet a couple that have created an inspirational garden that uses a restricted colour palette. Nick Bailey takes a close look at the microscopic creatures that are vital to keep our soil healthy and full of nutrients. And Frances is tackling your gardening problems. And this week, she visits a viewer's garden to put the right plants in the right place. These are some of the sweet peas that we grew for my son's wedding. This is actually a variety called Bramdean. Lovely white flowers, and they've been flowering very well for the last month or so. But this row is pretty much done now, and I want to remove them all because I've got blackberries growing sort of in and underneath them that need tying up and preparing for next year. Right, we can take these out. Well, that really is putting summer away. Sweet peas are gone, and the leaves are starting to fall. But it creates space for the blackberries, and after all, that's what all this was for. The sweet peas were merely borrowing the space for a special occasion. Now, the thing to remember when you're growing blackberries is that the previous year's canes, i.e. this growth here, is going to carry next summer's fruit. So we need to tie this in some regime so it'll be secure and easy to pick and allow room for the new canes that will start growing next May to grow up without obscuring it or rubbing against them. There are lots of different techniques of doing this, but I'm going to fan train these. So the first thing to do is just tie all this in. This is a variety called Apache, which is a mid-season variety, and it's thornless. And some blackberries can be really prickly, so being thornless is a huge advantage. And it's got nice big fruits, very tasty. And as yet, it's not very vigorous. In its first year, it's put on relatively modest growth, but this will easily fill this area. So the basic fan shape is there, and these will carry the fruits next year. The new growth will come up from the base, and as it grows, I'll just bundle it in together. It'll be nice and soft and flexible, and loosely tie them up the centre. And then when I prune these back down to the ground, which I will do after fruiting is finished, the canes that are in the middle can be untied and then just opened out to form the next fan. And that procedure will continue for year after year. And after about 3 or 4 years, it should be really vigorous and healthy, and I can start selecting canes rather than just tying them all in. Now, although I've removed the sweet peas, I will, of course, grow them again next year. But I couldn't think of not having that quintessentially English cottage garden plant. We went to visit a cottage garden a few months ago at its height of summer perfection, where Peter and Margaret Hargreaves have made a little piece of gentle heaven.
We moved into the cottage in 1975. It was solely a lawn with an apple tree.
I do the planting because Peter just won't touch that, but I don't want him to anyway because I like to do it.
I like to keep it tidy. Mowing the lawn, deadhead.
You're only allowed to have the push mower, aren't you? We don't have electric mowers in this garden. Otherwise, he'd be mowing all my flowers up. Colour is the main thing. Immediately, I started colour scheming the garden. It gave me an extra dimension to my gardening. The soil was my palette, and I was painting on it. I think every garden should draw you in. And my garden, I wanted the colour to draw you into it. This bed, I've planted it in pastels and then going to dark and then back again, so that it flows through the border. And this is my peach, whites and blues. It's a little bit more of a tricky bed to do because it's difficult to get hold of peach flowers. The hotbed, I had to have it because I love the red flowers. This chocolate dahlia here called Karma Chocolate. And then, of course, I have lots of lilies. My lilies stay in for the whole time, and I always make sure that in the autumn I feed them with bone meal.
We're doing a lot of work just for ourselves. Therefore, I thought, well, we might as well share it with the public. Doing the NGS meant we raised money for charity. First year, as it happened, we opened by appointment because we were both working, and we thought we'd just do it calmly, and no one came at all. But last year, we got just over 1,000 visitors, and over the last 25 years, with this year so far, we have just hit £75,000.
I start making scones at the beginning of March and put them in the freezer. I have to be meticulous about everything. This always seems to be the popular part that people like to sit in. It's very relaxing. And this is planted in mauves, purples and silvers. It's important to use height in the garden so that the garden tears down. I'm very keen on foliage. It makes a nice backdrop to the plants. I've discovered with eryngiums that you must plant them at the front of the border, otherwise they'll just die on you or they won't flower at all. I call them unsociable. They must be on their own and have plenty of space. The thalictrums I particularly like. You can put it at the back of the border and you can also have it at the front of the border because you can see through it. And I think that gives it rather a sexy look. When I was the age of 4 and I could walk around my mother's garden, I used to be fascinated with the colour of her sweet williams. I then went over the road to the farmer's wife. I was mesmerised with the colour of her flowers, but more so, I was taken with the soil that she was putting the plants into. It was black and rich and loamy. When we moved here, I was delighted because I inherited black, loamy, rich soil. I thought I must do what the farmer's wife did and put lots of goodness into it. I would take the muck and fling it all over the borders. And I think this is what's given it its initial start. And this is why the plants look particularly healthy and grow to quite a high height. It's just sheer love. And everybody seems to enjoy it so much when they come. Gardening definitely comes with experience. The more you do of it, the more you learn about it. I can be out here 12 hours a day, but it never bothers me. I just enjoy every minute of it. It never seems like a chore to me, and it does reward us very well.
I really like the delicacy of the colours that are used there, and also the height in the borders. It makes such a difference. And there's no question that by limiting your choice of colours and giving yourself colour restrictions, it's actually a liberation. And you don't necessarily have to work with specific colours. For example, here in the Jewel Garden, it's not so much what we do use, it's what we don't use. So there are no pale colours. There's no white, there are no pale pinks or lavenders or mauves or anything like that. And it makes planting a lot easier if you work within parameters, and it's good fun too. Thank you, Nigel. Right. The sweet peas go onto the compost. They'll be shredded and go through the whole compost process and be turned 3 or 4 times and come out the other end ready to put back on the soil, probably on next year's sweet peas. But at this time of year, we're coming to the season of leaf mould. Now, I often talk about leaf mould because I love it. But I need to be really clear what it is, because it is very different from compost. For a start, leaf mould, although it looks fairly similar, is made entirely from fallen leaves. All we do with this is gather up the fallen leaves once a week between now and Christmas and put them on here and they rot down. There are 1 or 2 tips about making good leaf mould. The first is you need to mow it. What we do if it's dry enough is lay the leaves down and just mow them all up. And that reduces the volume and, more importantly, increases the surface area. And then we chuck it on here and gradually this fills up. And actually, by Christmas, the leaves are stacked right up this high and they reduce down to about 1/4 of the volume. And after just 1 year, that's what they're reduced to. And we've done absolutely nothing. That hasn't been turned, it hasn't been treated in any way, we add nothing. That is nature just gradually breaking them down. And the compost is slightly sticky, whereas this is soft and fluffy. And the degrading process is rather different because bacteria are the really critical element of making compost, although there's a lot of fungi and nematodes and small creatures as well. Whereas it's fungus that does most of the work on converting leaves into leaf mould. And the reason you have leaf mould separate from compost is because it does different things. It's really good as part of potting compost. It's open and loose and great for little delicate roots to work into. It's a fabulous mulch for woodland plants. And finally, it improves the structure of the soil. And structure is, in many ways, as important as fertility. Now, what we do is sieve it. And you can buy small sieves, but it's quite hard work and you only do a small quantity at a time. So for a number of years, we've had homemade sieves that we use. This is the coarse one. It's just chicken wire on a frame with a couple of legs. And you can see, if I put that like that, and then you just chuck the material through it. And it's surprising how fine it sieves it. And if you want even finer material for potting compost, we've got another sieve here, which you put over a barrow like that, and just work stuff onto it. And it's going through the fine mesh, leaving all the larger stuff behind. So just to show you, we'll take that off, put that on, and what you've got in there is really lovely, beautifully sieved leaf mould. Now this isn't just a deliciously textured material, it's also full of life. And yet the truth is, we know very little about the soil. For most of us, it's completely an unknown world. However, Nick Bailey went to visit one man who has made it his life study.
Soil is the foundation for everything that grows on our planet, and it's crucial to the success of what flourishes in our gardens, supporting plants and providing them with water and nutrients.
Worms and beetles do their bit to keep the soil healthy, but deep underground, there's a host of other critical creatures that are owed some long overdue respect.
Dr. Charlie Clutterbuck is a soil zoologist, an expert in microscopic creatures who spent his career exploring the importance of this macro world. I've come to his garden in Lancashire to learn more about the critters that he believes are vital to a healthy and productive garden.
Hi, Charlie.
Oh, hello.
How are you doing?
Fine, thanks.
Now, I'm hoping you can give us some insight into this incredible ecosystem that's happening underneath us.
I'd like to, because most people treat it like dirt, don't they? Whereas it's actually the living force for the whole planet. Under this garden here, there's probably half worms and half mesofauna. And they're actually doing a lot more work than worms do, believe it or not.
And with a simple tin can, Charlie can show me up close what these mesofauna are all about.
You just push it into the ground, turn it round, and then turn it upside down so that the surface animals are nearer the bottom and the deeper ones are at the top, which means the ones on the surface can move out quicker.
Let's have a look.
OK.
So, this is the garage lab, Charlie.
It is indeed. And this is the soil sample that I've just taken from the garden. We've put it in a cola bottle in a good old-fashioned jam jar, and we put it under these lights. And what happens is, after a couple of days, the soil animals come down into the vials below.
But why are these creatures so important? Charlie collected a sample from his lawn a few days ago for me to find out.
There we've put a microscope on it, and these black creatures with the antennae running around fast, they're springtails.
I mean, it's amazing. There's so many of them.
Well, those springtails, their main role is eating up the debris of the roots. The roots are sloughing off the skin all the time. They're eating that, so they're keeping the plants healthy.
So, in other words, the plant can absorb more moisture because its roots are clean.
That's right,
Yeah,
much more.
yeah.
And there's a white springtail. That's
Oh, yeah,
it, that's
yeah.
it. That's something called an onychurid, and they are known for transporting the spores of the fungi to the roots. These creatures are like the bees of the soil. They're accidentally, if you like, pollinating the roots with the fungal spores.
Gardeners are aware that you can use a mycorrhizal fungi to help extend the root reach of your plants. In other words, the fungi gets into the roots, grows out, and it helps the plant draw in more water and nutrition. But these guys are pivotal in that process as well.
Yes, we need the creatures as well to make it work. On its own, it just stays where it is.
I mean, it's a real mosh pit of creatures, isn't it? They're all kind of on top of each other.
Well, apart from the springtails, the little brown blobs are oribatid mites, and there are millions of those in the soil. They're probably the most important, apart from the springtails, because what they're doing is breaking down the debris and their poo is basically the nutrient for the plants. There's probably, in terms of weight, as many of them as worms, but they're doing a lot more running around than worms. Worms are like the big excavators, the orobatids are the little engines of the soil. I think it's the last great kingdom to be explored. What you're seeing here is very unusual. People haven't collected them alive before. We've always collected them dead and then tried to make sense. To see them moving around and how they relate is a massive step forward.
When it comes to optimising soil fauna in our own gardens, Charlie has some great advice.
Well, Nick, 3 years ago, this garden was just consolidated flat clay. And what I've tried to do is use two aspects of the soil animals, dealing with the dead stuff and keeping the plants alive, to try and make this into decent soil. So I added woodland litter to the dirt, which is what it was then, and the worms and the soil animals are now turning that into soil. Woodland litter is good because there's 4 times as many creatures in that as they are in this sort of soil.
So why is there more fauna in woodland soil?
Because that's basically where they originated from. Also, what I did was turf, cut the lawn up and put it into the bed so that the other soil animals, those little springtails, they can help bring the fungi, the mycorrhiza fungi, to the roots. And I think I was rather pleased that these fruit trees, just in 3 years, are doing as well as they are. And I put it down to, obviously, the fertiliser and the fungi, but also those little soil creatures. And if you want to have a quick test of whether it's working or not, put a jam jar in the ground and see if you catch ground beetles the next morning.
And so they're a real indicator that says the fauna's improved, it's working.
When you see these black beetles running around, you know that they're preying on those soil animals, telling you that's a healthy soil.
I do find that the life in the soil is completely fascinating. And I love the idea of the black beetles being a really good indicator of health. And if we can look after the soil and the creatures that live in it, they will look after our plants. Now, I've got a little group of plants here, Meconopsis lingholm, which is not entirely healthy, and that does have something to do with the soil. Meconopsis is one of the most beautiful plants you can grow in any garden, with wonderful icy blue flowers. However, it's picky. They like acidic soil if they can have it. They like cool, damp summers, and they don't like drying out at all. Now, if they can have those conditions, they grow very well. But if they don't have all of that, they can just sulk and give up the ghost. They can either become very short-lived and die after 2 or 3 years, or monocarpic. And what that means is once they set seed, the parent plant dies. And you can see, look, that's rotted off and is no good. This clump here, I'm going to lift it and divide it. Now, you could do this in spring, and probably the books will tell you it's better to do it in spring. The reason I'm going to do it now is because we've already lost 2 plants. It's not looking very happy. My gut feeling is do this now while the soil is still warm, get the new clump growing, and there'll be a better chance of a performance next spring. So I've got half a plant there, and the root system is a bit tenuous. It's not very strong. And this is really quite solid clay, which could be one of the reasons it's not so happy. So I'm going to carefully put this down. I'm going to replant this over on the other side. But before I do it, I'm going to prepare the ground a little bit. I've got ericaceous compost. In fact, this is made from bracken, but you can have an ericaceous compost made from pine bark and pine needles. And I'm going to add that to the soil. It won't change the nature of the soil, but it will just give the plant that little boost that it needs. And then take one of these clumps and plant it in there. I'm going to water that in, and hopefully that will reinvigorate it. Now, the plan is that this will give these plants a new lease of life. They are temperamental. They may give up the ghost, but it won't be for want of trying. And there's no question that sometimes tackling things that are difficult can be deeply satisfying. Mind you, some problems can just be a headache. And this week, Francis is tackling one of gardening's more tricky problems, and one which most of us have to deal with in our gardens sooner or later.
As gardeners, we experience all different conditions. It might be full shade or full sun, or it could be something like bad drainage. But whatever the problem, the solution is finding plants that cope with those conditions. Sometimes, though, we get those plants a bit wrong.
Sam Croft lives in Gloucestershire, and I suspect that some of her plants are in the wrong place.
So I've got a few areas in the garden that I've got things that won't grow and not doing very well. My raspberries being one of them.
Okay.
Absolutely love raspberries, but it's not really doing very well.
Right. You know, I can see why they're not very happy, and that's because they're planted so close together.
Okay.
And actually, if you can see, it's already putting out runners. What I would do is get them out, break them up, and spread them all along this wall rather than in one clump.
Okay, and along here I've got the foundations for the garage, so there's not much soil on top of that.
Okay.
Just there.
Maybe not here. Do you have another bed where these could go? The
Yeah,
bins?
just over here.
Okay.
In this one?
In this one here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is that a banana?
Yes.
That's tiny. Has that been kept over winter out in the bed?
Yeah.
Did it damage quite a lot?
Yes.
See, I would say if you want to put the raspberries in there, this is a great space for them, but you're going to need to dig this up.
Okay.
And I would put this in a pot so that you can bring it indoors in the winter because they really struggle, and imagine you get quite cold here in the winter.
Yeah, I've got some pots.
Okay, let's go and have a look.
This pot there.
Okay, that's great. That's a lovely pot, actually, isn't
Yeah.
it? See, it's quite small, but your banana is quite small at the moment, so that'll be perfect in there for now, and then in a few years, once it gets bigger, you want to put it onto a bigger pot.
Yeah.
But I can see actually sitting here, this Acer, I'm guessing it's a bit windy here. I can
Yes.
see it's in the wind now.
Yeah.
That's what's giving your leaves this scorching. It's a
Okay.
really common problem with Acers. But if I were you, I'd move that Acer into a much more sheltered position.
Yeah.
That's a couple of small problems solved, but Sam has a much bigger task for me to tackle.
So Sam, why have you asked for help with this area of your garden?
Just really because I've put a lot of plants in over the last few years and things aren't growing, and I just wanted a bit of advice of what I can plant in here, what would grow and what would look nice, make a nice feature.
So what you've got here, Sam, is actually a really nice bed, but I imagine quite shaded in the summer by
Yes.
this cherry tree.
Yes.
What's the soil like in this bed?
So underneath, it's just thick clay. So on top, it's quite nice soil, but underneath, as we dig down, it's solid, absolutely solid.
is. First, I think we're going to have to really give this a good
Yes.
digging, aren't we?
Yes.
Before we give it all a good dig, all of the plants have to come out. Sam isn't really attached to the sorry-looking conifer or the huge, unwieldy buddleia, so they'll be discarded.
Okay. That's half.
But the rest are a valuable source of new plants. Once they're all out, we dig in plenty of organic matter to loosen up and reinvigorate the heavy clay.
So now that the bed is cleared and dug and prepped, it's sort of time to decide what we put back in it. And I think we can use a lot of the plants that we took out and put them back.
Okay.
Things like this Kniphofia is clearly doing really, really well in that bed. So in terms of right plant, right place, that gives you a pretty good clue
Yeah.
that that's the right plant.
Okay, yeah.
So rather than going to the garden centre and buying a whole load more or buying things you don't know will survive, we can just divide this and use it. And you have plants for free then as well.
Excellent.
First, though, I'm going to take the tops off because, as a general rule, when you break anything off the roots, you have to take something off the top so the plant's nice and balanced.
Okay.
Now, all these plants naturally want to divide anyway, so if you just get your hands in and kind of pull them, there, and there you have. So from one big clump, we now have 3 smaller ones, and a really small one.
Brilliant.
And things like this, the saxifrage will do exactly the same. So do you want to divide that one? There. Right. So as well as the lovely plants we've taken out and are putting back in, I've actually got you some extra ones as well. This is a fuchsia, which we know does really well already and you love.
Yes.
So I was thinking if we put this one here.
Okay, brilliant.
So it's near that fuchsia there.
Beautiful.
And this Weigela, which is a softer colour, so it's a dusky pink to red flower. And that beautiful colour of foliage.
Yeah.
And this will flower in the springtime, which is good for here because you're underneath the shade of a cherry tree, which is obviously deciduous. So in spring, this won't be in leaf. So any spring flowers are good for this area.
Lovely, okay.
But Weigela can cope with a bit of shade anyway, partial shade, which is perfect for here. Whenever you're placing things, you always want to start with your biggest structures that go all through the bed so you know where they'll be, and then the smaller herbaceous things come through them. So the red hot poker is good at the back there, but I think it needs to come slightly further away from the trunk so it's not in full shade.
Okay.
Setting out the plants is really subjective, but it's always best to lay all of them out before planting them.
A bit further back, maybe? Yeah, beautiful.
One thing to remember is that plants need plenty of space to grow.
Shall we start planting?
Along with fuchsias and Weigela, some of the hardy geraniums are great for partial shade.
These will all need a really good soaking now, Sam. Basically, without water getting down to the roots can't make contact with the soil around them, and without that contact, they can't get the nutrients in. So it's really important, especially on these bare-rooted ones. Look at it. It's flagging, poor thing. Well, you were nearly there before, but just a few tweaks, and suddenly it's taken.
Yeah, looks absolutely wonderful now. Thank you so much for coming along and helping me. I'll definitely be out here watering every evening anyway.
You better. No, it's a pleasure. I want to come back and see it when it's all grown up.
Yeah, you're
Brilliant.
welcome. Thank you.
It's been really good to get out and meet some of you and share the problems. So do keep them coming in, and we'll keep on trying to do our best to help you with them. Because after all, we all share exactly the same set of problems. None of us are immune from them. And certainly one of the things that I notice here at Longmeadow, which is fundamentally a very wet place, is just how dry it can be underneath the shade of a tree and with the roots sucking up all that moisture. We've had a good tomato season this year. I've picked the last of the ripe tomatoes. We've been harvesting them since July, and they've been tasty. And I think that was because but I'm cutting my losses now. There'll be no more new fruit. The green fruit that's here will be very slow to ripen, and I want the space. I can grow my salad crops in here if I clear these out of the way. So I want to clear these, dig the ground over, add a little bit of garden compost, and then I can get planting. However, it may be the end of this season's tomatoes, but we've still got plenty to come on today's programme. Joe visits a small town garden that has been cleverly designed to make the most of its available space. But first, Adam has been to visit a very special allotment. Allotments tend to be a patchwork of individuals and idiosyncrasies, but this one is very much a community effort.
Every Tuesday morning, there is one allotment here in Manchester that is full of voices from all around the world. They all have one thing in common. They're all refugees, but they do share something else, which is a real love for gardening. The project simply aims to bring asylum seekers and refugees together to learn more about growing food. Many of the participants have lived through unimaginable horrors, and naturally many fear being identified. So we'll only be filming those who have given their consent. Sally Ann Clouston is a volunteer at the allotment and is a trained horticultural therapist. What these people have lived through must be horrific.
They are fleeing conflict on a huge scale, some of them, and have seen the deaths of family members, sometimes all family members. Some of them, their own life is threatened, and if they went back, they would die.
Emily arrived in the UK from the Congo. So what brings you back every single Tuesday, you know, to come and be part of it?
When I come here, I feel good. I feel I'm safe. When I come here, my mind is good.
And found himself without a home.
40% of the population, they were based between Nigeria and Ghana.
Wow.
Because they can't go back. Some people already took their land, and there's no police there to protect you because they work hand in hand.
Yeah.
So
you're stuck, literally 40% of society stuck in no man's land.
They decided not to come back. This project gives me stability.
Yeah.
When I say stability, 80% of the people I know today is through this garden. It's a big family because when you are here, some will say, oh, today I'm a bit down because I have a bad news today. People will tell you, it happened to me, not only you. So don't worry, you just have to try to see what you can do to sort it out. That is when I say, when you are happy, everybody is happy. Because when people are happy, we all clap and dance. You know, people, we act together.
Today I've heard stories of people ripped apart from their children, women raped by soldiers who were supposed to be protecting them, and men and women fearing death simply because of their sexuality. They didn't sit down and tell me this on camera, but privately whilst we were weeding and digging together. I wonder if that's partly why this project works.
That's the beauty of this space, being in nature and with nature. It really helps them to feel more about the fact that the soil here, literally the soil, is the soil of their homeland. It's all soil, it's all the earth, and that's the connection.
That connects us, I suppose, doesn't it? Tom Spencer set up the project and is now helped by a handful of volunteers. Tom, why did you get involved?
So a group of us, just a group of friends, had an idea to get a community allotment together, and we were lucky enough to get this set of 5 plots. One of the people who was involved at that time worked with a refugee organisation, and she said, hey, it would be really great to get a bunch of people to come and get an experience of doing some gardening. It went really well, and lots of people just sort of their faces lit up, so we thought, well, maybe we could do this on a more regular basis.
Now up to 50 people turn up every week to help grow fruit and veg from all over the world. So what is the range of plants you actually grow on the allotment?
It changes a bit year to year, depending on what people want to grow. Sometimes people, you know, the sort of overwhelming sort of momentum will be potatoes and onions. So, you know, sometimes it's all about potatoes and onions. We often also get people saying, can we grow mangoes, bananas, cassava, yam? We're like, well, we can plant it. You know, that's the thing with gardening, isn't it? The only way that any of us know anything is by trying things and seeing what works and what doesn't.
So you're working with gardeners ultimately from all around the world. Have they taught you anything over the period of time?
Yeah, definitely. I've learned about the rugari is one that I was particularly interested in. I've never seen brassicas propagated like that before, where it's just taking a cutting, sticking it in some compost, and off it goes. You know, the following year we had these amazing, massive brassica plants that we'd never seen.
And away it
before.
went.
And away it went, yeah, just totally took off.
Volunteer and formal social worker Jackie Cotton sees the social benefits of the garden.
The people who come to the project, they fled such difficult situations in the countries that they've come from. And then they've come to England looking for protection and find themselves in a very difficult situation, not able to work, not able to claim benefits, often destitute or with very little income to keep them going. So coming to the garden, people often say, is that bit of respite during the week when they can leave their problems outside that door and come in and just immerse themselves in the gardening. Just let all the difficult stuff they've got going on in their lives put aside just for a few hours. People often talk about the mental health benefits of coming here. So reductions in anxiety and depression are the usual things people say.
I've been gardening professionally since I was 16 years old, and for me it's been so obvious for so long that gardens can fix you. And here, I suppose in a sense it proves it, you know, socially. It brings something physically. And then your mental well-being, that idea of having your hands in the soil and growing and caring, for me, really can fix you.
Not only do they grow fruit and veg, the participants take it in turns to create delicious meals.
What I really love, actually, is it seems that whatever walk of life they come from, you know, country, whatever, none of it matters here when they're here as a group and in the garden.
No, because plants don't care what colour you are. They don't care where you're from. All they care about is being nurtured and nourished and helped to grow. And that's a lovely thing, that something that you put time and effort into gives back to all of us. Like one big family, we all sit down together and we share the food.
This really has been an incredible day. I think emotionally it's taken me all over the place. I've had times when the hairs on the back of my neck have stood up, and with all the bad stuff there is that's going on in the world, that what human beings can do for each other can be so positive. And here, it's all done around something as simple as a garden.
I am certain that as well as mental and physical health, gardening of any kind, if it's done communally, creates a kind of social health too. Now, I have taken out the tomatoes, dug over the soil, loosened the compaction, and now, before I plant, I'm actually going to refresh it a little bit with just a light dressing of compost. I'm going to start by planting these mixed mustards. Now, when you're planting winter salad crops under cover, or even outside for that matter, there are two things you have to do. One is choose your crops carefully. It's no good trying to grow types of lettuce that you grow in the summer. You need to choose the varieties that have adapted to lower light levels and colder weather. The other thing is have good, strong plants. These were sown in the middle of August, and you can see that this has got a fairly good root system. It's growing around the outside of the plug. Nice, healthy, strong growth on top, and that's what you want. The healthier the plant and the stronger it's growing, the longer it will last and the more leaves that you'll be able to harvest. Now, I like to space these about 8 inches apart. That gives them a chance to grow into nice, strong plants. Now, obviously, if you don't have a greenhouse, don't be put off growing these, because a cloche will work really well at extending the season. In fact, this greenhouse really amounts to a big cloche. And these, I fully intend to be still harvesting next February. And I think that if you can set yourself the task of having fresh vegetables, and I love salad, every single day of the year, it doesn't take much. A few cloches, a polytunnel, a small greenhouse, and it can be done. Well, that's mustard planted. I've got rocket, and I've got some claytonia and some winter lettuce and Valdor, and that will fill up the other beds. And the final thing to remember is just because we're coming into winter, keep the doors open during the daytime. The more exposed they are to cool weather, the better they will be able to resist really cold weather. So don't try and mollycoddle them too much. And don't forget to water them. They're not getting the outside rain. They will need a good soak at least once a week. And they should grow, if you get these in the ground over the next week, for about another month. And don't worry if you see no signs of growth from the middle of November to Christmas time at all. They're just holding, but they'll come back. Now, one of the advantages of living in the countryside is that you have more space. Gardens are bigger. But if you live in the town, your garden is just as precious and, of course, can be just as beautiful. And Jo has been to visit a professional garden designer living in London with a small back garden who has made her own personal paradise.
Whatever its size, the foundation of any successful garden is good design. Butter Wakefield is an award-winning garden designer. She's been developing her own small city garden for over 25 years to cater for her growing family and an active social life. This garden really works from a design point of view because it not only looks great, but it functions well too. For a start, we've got this terrace. Now, it's nice and generous. In fact, it spans the whole width of the garden. Over on this side, we've got a dining area, and that's underneath the shade of the magnolia. And when you're eating, you don't want to sit in full sun, you like a little bit of shade. And there's lovely compositions to look onto as well. So we've got the stumpery in that shady spot over there. We've got this wicker ball with plants growing out of it, and then another wicker ball as you look up, dangling down from the tree. So there's a nice continuity of shapes running through there, but not too cluttered. And on this side, we've got a much more of a relaxed feel. We've got a coffee table, and it's going to catch the evening sun, so it's the perfect place just for an al fresco drink. It isn't innovative. In fact, it's pretty traditional. We've got a rectangular lawn in a rectangular plot. So why does it work so well? To me, it's all about the basics. It's about scale, proportion and balance. When you look back, you see that the planting is in proportion to the house. So we've got the magnolia tree on one side. We've got the apple that balances it out on the other. And then there's the borders themselves. Now, they're not just thin little planting areas around the outside of the lawn, which is a really common mistake. Here, they're really generous, 1.2 metres wide, and it means you can tier the planting up as well, having the perennial plants at the front, we can have shrubs in the middle and climbers towards the back. So in fact, the boundaries are completely lost, and the garden could be even bigger than it really is, because the eye is tricked into not knowing exactly where it finishes. And then there's the structure of these 8 box pyramids, and they dominate the space. They add real architecture. But the thing I love, and the simplest element in the whole garden, is this wildflower meadow. You wouldn't expect to see it here, but it breaks the lawn up, it brings texture into the garden, it's a bit of fun, it's great for diversity, great for wildlife, and even that meandering lawn through what is otherwise a smile. So, Butter, when you had designed and you knew what was going to go on in this garden, did you just make it happen? Did you throw money at it and just decide?
I've never had that luxury, I'm afraid. I knew I wanted box, but that took years. I've pretty much grown these from, you know, nothing, actually. So it's been a gradual process. You learn how the garden will work for you and what you want to get out of it. And that takes time, doesn't it? You learn where your sunny spots are, where you want to sit at the end of the day. It's not a big garden. It's 8 meters wide by 21 long, so I've managed to cram quite a bit in.
In a city garden, I guess, especially a small city garden, the connection to the interior is greater, it's more important somehow.
I have very carefully placed things that I like to look at out of my kitchen window. I've got my bird feeders and my pots full of, you know, winter flowering, scented gorgeousness. Scent's so crucial. I think it's irresponsible to design, you know, without it. If you're thinking about designing your own garden, you know, run up and down your house and look out the windows, and equally looking back at the house from the garden.
Your shrub.
I think shrubs have had a bit of a rotten turn, really. I mean, they're coming back into favor now, but this, in many ways, is kind of slightly easier to achieve, actually, a decent planting plan with shrubs. They really hold the garden together.
People would not put this many hydrangeas in
It's
a garden
kind of bonkers,
normally.
isn't it?
It's bold and it's confident.
Yes. Well, I think there's such great shrubs, actually, and I love nothing more than getting to the end of the week and coming out into the garden and cutting and bringing inside what's looking good. At the moment, I would have to say it might be the hydrangea Annabelle. I do love my front garden, and I think the importance of a front garden is crucial for setting the mood, setting the tone.
You're letting everyone know there's something going on here.
There might be something special going on here. And the front garden's a fun playground because, you know, you can have your little vignettes, you can have your seasonality in your pots. The front garden and the rear garden rather speak to one another from a design point of view, and the house sits very happily in between.
Panels of trellis that span the end of the garden, they've all got the same climber on them, so they give a nice continuous feel. And you think that this is the back of the garden, but it isn't. There's a little bit more going on. Here, Butter's created another little room to the end of the garden. She comes and pots up plants and puts the bulbs in containers and also brings plants when they're over, when they're slightly finished, like this hellebore was out the front, and when it starts flowering again, she'll take it out and present it to the world. But actually, this is a really nice little spot. This is Butter's favourite part of the garden, and I can see why. It's completely secluded. No one would ever know you were here. This garden really is beautifully designed. It somehow feels completely effortless. And there are a lot of gardeners out there who think design is really expensive, I have to throw money at it. And this proves that that is And this proves that that is just not true. If you break it down to what the actual elements in this garden are, they're so simple as far as the hard landscaping is concerned. And the rest of it, as all gardens should be, is about the plants. The whole point of design is that good design costs nothing. And this garden proves that.
I do agree with Joe that a small garden can be a lot harder to get right than a big one because you've got no room for error. And the secret always is to edit ruthlessly. Have a good idea and then just execute it and don't deviate. And the other thing, which I think every garden has to have, is somewhere where you can sit and feel private and relaxed. I began by replacing just a square of grass the other day, but in fact I've extended it all the way down along the edge of this path. And it's growing fine. Be tempted to walk on it or let alone mow it too soon, because in fact, if I lift it like that, it lifts like a bad toupee in the wind. So leave it, let the roots knit, and that'll be another month or so, and then I can mow and walk on it and charge around, it'll be nice and strong. You've still got time to lay turf or sow grass seed, but that really is something you need to get on with. I'm trying to do it this weekend if you possibly can. However, if you're not laying turf, don't worry. I've still got some jobs for you this weekend. Biennials are plants that grow their leaves and roots in their first growing season, followed by flowers in the second. And now is the time to plant them. I'm putting out foxgloves, but other biennials include wallflowers, sweet william, and forget-me-not. Plant them directly into the border where you want them to flower, and next spring and summer they will duly perform. If you took pelargonium cuttings, as I did in August, it's a good idea to pot them on now. And a gritty compost mix. And although the perlite worked perfectly well, I think the gritty mix worked even better. Divide the cuttings up and pop them on individually into a nice free-draining compost. Keep them somewhere warm and dry all winter, and then they'll be ready to grow away strongly next spring. If you grow chilies, even if they're as pathetic as mine have been this year, they will have fruits. And it's important to pick them as they turn red. Not only will this help to encourage more chilies to ripen, but you may even get more flowers being produced. Well, there's no question that we're deep into autumn. And this year it came early. The leaves yellowed and fell before the end of September. But here in the Jewel Garden, the short day plants, these plants from near the equator that respond to heat rather than light, like the Tithonias and the Dahlias and the Salvias, and they're going as strong now as they were at the height of summer. And this last blaze of colour could last another few weeks, or at least until the first frost. But there's no more flower. This week's programme. However, I will be back, of course, at the same time next week. So join me then. Bye-bye.